to Jim Feely. Jim is a branch manager with Homestead Mortgage in the Washington area. Good morning, Jim.
Good morning.
Before we start, I happen to know that you're a very heavy producer, do anywhere between 35 and 50 million a year. But I also know that one of your managers is one of my favorite people in the world, Peter Keogh. And Peter was my boss many years ago, and I just wanted to say actually on tape that he's certainly one of the finest managers and human beings that I ever worked with. I think your company's very lucky to have somebody like that.
Yeah, Peter's the president.
Yeah, right. And he was my boss at Travelers Mortgage years ago when I was a regional.
Right.
Long time ago. Anyway, before we get started, most of our listeners would like to know, they always like to know where people came from and how they get in the business. And so why don't we start there? When did you get in the business, Jim?
I got in the business in 1987. I was the founder of Homestead Mortgage and put together the financing package. At the time, I was actually a lobbyist for McDonnell Douglas in Washington, and I was doing this more as a sidelight. And after a year, I had put together the financing in a little team. It was a small startup brokerage, and after about a year, I went to work for the company full time. And about 6 months later, I started originating loans for the company. So it was in the late 80s.
Mm-hmm. Did you start in the Washington area? I mean, are you from the D.C. area?
Well, I am from Long Island and went to college in Baltimore at Johns Hopkins, and then had been working in Washington for about 15 years. I refer to it as mortgage banking was my first midlife crisis. I didn't really get into the business until I was 40 years old.
Wow, in fact, I don't think I've ever heard of somebody getting into business at that age. You know, it's often described as a young man's game, and in a certain respect it is. Although, as you well know, if you get too young in this business, I've known people that have grown mustaches and glasses and anything to make themselves look younger. Realtors actually, I think, in a certain respect, if you have your act together, it's easier to start off when you're older, just because realtors, they relate more.
That's absolutely true. That having the maturity helps not only in dealing with realtors, but in having sort of a built-in customer base. You know, having been a lobbyist and having worked in the Congress and in the White House, I knew an awful lot of people, and they didn't know very many loan officers, so I unbeknownst to me, I had kind of a built-in base right at the beginning from friends and colleagues.
Yeah, I'm sure that helped. When you started off, did you find that it was a little harder when you started off at 40 years? I mean, in terms of perhaps calling on realtors? I mean, how did you go about getting your business other than those initial referrals?
Well, I didn't really have anybody to learn from, to tell you the truth. But I was very motivated because it was my company. I had two partners, but I had a substantial stake in things, and any second thoughts I had about selling to realtors were put aside because I needed to protect my investment and make the business successful. And if that included my producing loans, then so be it. Get out there and do it, and that's kind of what I did.
Mm-hmm. Were you an extroverted person? Would you say you're an extroverted?
Not at all, no. But I'm not, bashful. I'm not, certainly not intimidated by realtors. And I didn't have any, as long as I was motivated, I didn't have any difficulty in selling to them and asking them for the business.
Mm-hmm. That's an extraordinary volume to be doing, starting off at such a late age, and it immediately leaps to mind a couple questions. The first one was, how did you go about doing it? Most people spend a lot more time to get up to the volumes you do.
Well, I was in the business probably a few years before I started, regularly breaking, say 20 million a year. And, my best year was about 63 million, and, now I average around 30. I think it was the combination of, if I was getting all my business from realtors, it would have been, my volume would have been 50% of what it was. It was really that base of referrals that came from previous customers and friends and former colleagues, that sort of thing, that made it fairly easy. That and I think the motivation of it being my own company had me out on weekends at open houses that realtors hold, and basically doing whatever it took to get to a certain level.
Mm-hmm. Did you set goals for yourself? Or did you just get out there and do it?
No, I think my goals were mostly for the company. Volume goals and profitability goals for the company.
Mm-hmm.
I set goals sort of informally now. I mean, my goal for this year is 30 million. But no, at that time, I didn't set production goals.
When you were out there, how did you develop this base, this non-realtor base? Was it a question of getting on the phone and calling him and sending out cards? And the reason I ask you that is because I think a lot of loan officers out there that are listening, they kind of forget that there's a huge market out there that's a non-realtor base.
Yeah, it's going to be kind of disappointing for you to hear. My list of things is longest of things that I should have done and didn't do, rather than what I did do.
The would have, could have, should have club.
So my base was sort of built in when I started in the business, and the way people contacted me was not that I got together a list and sent out a letter and let everybody know what I was doing and waited for the business to come in. It was really just word of mouth. I would make a few phone calls, but mostly it's bumping into people. And, an awful lot of people knew that I was going into the business, and quite frankly, they found it sort of perplexing that I was leaving the lobbying business for the mortgage banking business. I actually much prefer it. So I guess I stood out somewhat in that I was leaving that sort of insular world of Washington and doing something a little bit more mainstream, so people just sort of found their way to me, or I'd bump into them one place or another and give them a card and, hear from them a year later, or they'd refer me to friends. Washington, I think, tends to be that kind of a town, perhaps more than other places, where your currency is really in the people that you know.
Yeah, it is. And as a matter of fact, if you happen to take a look at yesterday's Washington Post, they had a real nice article. Maybe it was Sunday's, but they had a real nice article on about 10 people who are either LAs or AAs to congressmen and senators, one to Archer, and what they're going to do, and how transitory fame can be in the political arena.
Well, they do have a revolving door that takes you from Congress into some form of lobbying downtown, either law firms or consulting firms or corporations.
Right. That seems to be the general. If you kind of have it together, that seems to be the general flow at some point in time to head on back to K Street someplace. Well, let's talk a little bit in terms of the present and some of the advice that you would have for listeners out there that perhaps are new realtors just getting into business and
new mortgage bankers.
I'm sorry, new mortgage bankers and just getting into business. What advice do you have for them in terms of succeeding?
Well,
Because it's harder today.
I think I would set some goals. I think you should, if I was giving somebody advice right now and they were brand new to the business, I would say that you need to have some expectations, and that if you don't meet these expectations, you should reconsider your decision to be in the business, and you should probably give yourself a year. And this is a difficult time to be in it. There aren't any refinances to speak of. It's primarily a purchase business, but I would, get to know the person a little bit. But I'd probably say something like, if you're able to close 15 to 20 loans in your first year, that's good. You should be encouraged by that. If you close, 50 loans in your first year, in this year, a year like this, I think you're on your way to being a star. I think that your performance early in the business, maybe not the first couple of months, but the first 6 months, is a very good predictor for how you're going to perform later on. And that if you don't close any loans for 6 months, or close 2 loans in 6 months, then you should reconsider being in the business. Now, of course, the variable of how you go about getting those loans is important, and you need training, and you need some kind of plan, and some kind of accountability and execution. But all that aside, if you, I've had a lot of very qualified, intelligent, squared-away people that have made attempts to be loan officers and not succeeded. So it really isn't for everyone. CPAs, attorneys, PhDs, they've all fallen flat, and it's very difficult to predict who's going to succeed. Motivation, of course, is important. But
I was going to ask you, tangential to that, did you find in these people that did not make it some sort of a common thread or a couple common threads going through it?
Sometimes, they just weren't salespeople, I guess.
Okay, that's one.
They might have thought that their technical expertise and intelligence was going to carry the day, and some were unwilling to pay the price that you had to pay in terms of selling time. You had to really be out there 7 days a week, night and day. And that doesn't mean 80 hours a week. It just means you need to be selective as to when you are out selling your wares, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Any other themes you think might run through that?
You mean common threads to people that didn't make it?
Yeah, that didn't make it, because you're right. In this business, you certainly need, I think you would agree with this, you certainly need a certain amount of innate intelligence. This is a complex business. It's a business of rules and formulas and knowing stuff. You can't be an idiot and even have a chance of surviving in this business, no matter what your sales skills are. So you brought that up. But in terms of sales skills, do you feel that maybe there's not enough emphasis on sales training, or they just, didn't have it? There's an old saying.
I think they just didn't have it.
Yeah, there's no saying.
Some of them got in the business at a difficult time, right at the end of a refi boom.
Yeah, there's a theory on that. I've been in the business since the 70s, early 70s, and there's kind of a theory on that sometimes it's better to be and start in a business when times are tough, so that when times pick up, you're fully prepared. You know your products. You've got your selling experience. You kind of got your boot camp out of the way. And I actually think there's some merit to that. I've talked to people that have gotten in right at the height of the refi booms, and they pick up the phone, and all of a sudden, when that disappears, they never bothered to talk to any realtors, and it's like they're out of business.
Yeah. I don't know what makes people successful and what doesn't, but it does help to be, out there getting in people's faces and having a credible presentation. and I don't know, understanding when you're making headway and when you're not. I mean, there are all sorts of elements, but I also think someone that has had success in their past is a good predictor for future success. That's fairly obvious, but it oftentimes with loan officers that weren't able to get any traction, they hadn't had any particular success in any of their other endeavors either. They weren't, failures as people, but they had been sort of, plodding along.
I just was reviewing in support of your comment there. You may even know him, a fellow named Rod Flowers. He's a VP with SunTrust, actually down in Salisbury, Maryland.
Yeah, I've heard of him.
Yeah, well, he does about $70 million a year, and I was interviewing him, actually just listening to the interview, which I do now and then, and he had something that I think kind of supports your contention here. He was not just a star athlete, went to Loyola College and got an MBA from there, but he played about 5 or 6 different sports, and I said that he would stay after practices when everybody left and, just work a little bit harder. And so that I think that is something that prepares you when you get out in the real world. He had discipline, he had drive, he was aggressive. He had it so that when he hit the ground running, he wasn't intimidated by the business, quite the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's sort of a balance there where nothing is more important than persistence in this business.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you do have to recognize when no amount of persistence is going to make you successful. I mean, recognize when this is not the best use of your time. But for those that are going to be successful, I think a high level of persistence is present in all of them.
I think that's, I remember back in the old days when I was producing, we used to have a saying, there was almost like a poem on persistence that, nothing is better than persistence. The persistence will always win out over time, assuming that, as you correctly said, that you have the knowledge base and know your product and have some sales skills too. What do you do? How many people do you have that work under you?
We have 3 loan officers.
Mm-hmm. And would you, without going into individuals and maybe making this a little more general, those that are successful, why do you think that they are successful?
Well, I think the persistence and a positive attitude, upbeat people, optimistic people, who get along well with others, and those that can communicate, those that can, sit down with a customer or a realtor and listen to them and provide them with information that helps them make choices and helps them feel like they're making the choice that's in their best interest, that they're making an informed choice. So I see those qualities in varying degrees in the successful loan officers.
Have most of your loan officers been around for a while, or are they fairly new?
No. They each have over 10 years experience.
Mm-hmm. So they've certainly established themselves at that point.
Yes.
Do you think time is important, having time in the business? Now, I know that in a way that's a truism, better to have 15 years than 5, but does time, do you think it's an important element in developing your business?
Absolutely. I've long held that there is a substantial annuity aspect to loan officering, and that the longer you're in the business, the more repeat business you're going to have, you're going to do more business, and a greater percentage of that business is going to come from warm referrals, from previous clients, from friends of previous clients, from realtors. I don't ignore realtors at all, but from your that so-called database that everybody sort of has.
I think this is you're on one of my favorite subjects, actually, because I have always maintained, when I was teaching loan officers many years ago, and I've maintained it throughout my career, that this is one of the very few annuity businesses that are available where you can make a lot of money. If I were to ask you to name some annuity-type businesses that are available where you can make this kind of money, you would be hard put to do it, other than maybe some insurance field. It's a rare business. I think that this is, in terms of value added to someone's career, I think being able to be in an annuity business is really right at the top of the heap.
Yes.
But that also
to make the point somewhat, I would seriously say that one of the elements that has helped my success, if you will, is something as stupid as I've had the same telephone number for 8 years.
I don't think that's stupid at all. In fact, I think that's of enormous importance. A little thing like that's really not little.
Right.
I just finished a discussion about an hour ago. We were talking about a fellow who recommended, in fact, it was Rod Flowers, actually. We were talking about him, how he recommends using the fax as a low-tech vehicle, but really it is high-tech in the sense that he doesn't put a cover sheet on it. When people get that fax, they see it on the table. Other realtors see it. It goes on somebody's desk. Other people see it. I think there's a little bit of version there in using the same phone number. It sounds very low-tech, but the fact that people can always get you. I have a friend of mine named Jack Marino I've known for maybe 40 years, and he's lived in the Bethesda area, now lives down near Palisades, and wherever he goes, he keeps the same phone number.
Right.
What do your loan officers do in terms of getting realtor business? How do they approach the business? And where I'm leading here is that it's kind of a different world with realtors today than it was even when you got in the business, and certainly when I got in, where there was ease of entry. You could kind of walk in, chew the fat with anybody you wanted, say hello to the manager, come in and sit down, and that's kind of disappeared now.
Well, it's not as universally available, but there is still some of that. The traffic in offices of loan officers is way down, so they're not viewed as much a nuisance factor as they once were back in the early 90s, let's say. So surprisingly, you probably can make some headway there, although you're bumping heads with the in-house lender. What I did and what I recommend doing, or would recommend doing, is to I use the term warm referrals an awful lot. I mean, I don't think I've ever closed a loan from someone calling off the Yellow Pages or the internet or something where they haven't been referred to me by somebody that knows me. And I would take that same and did take that same approach to realtors. If you're new to the business, don't take on realtors cold. I mean, you can do that as part of your plan, but the more central part of your plan should be to have friends, relatives, whomever, refer you to realtors that they may have a personal or business relationship with, so that you'll call the realtor and they say, oh, Betty Jones talked about you and said you were a wonderful guy. Sure, let's get together for coffee or lunch or something like that. And that's so much different from going into an office with rate sheets and strange names and faces and expect to distinguish yourself. And you'd be surprised. It certainly wasn't very difficult for me to get a half a dozen or a dozen warm referrals on that, to realtors on that basis. And from that, you develop relationships with some percentage of them, and then they'll give you introductions to their colleagues that are also warm or come with a sort of a personal endorsement.
That goes back to your earlier comment, kind of loops back in earlier when you were talking about the need for new loan officers to put the hours in, even 7 days a week, but putting it in smart and working smart, not hard.
That's right. Well, both.
Well,
smarter rather than harder.
Yeah, I agree. I think today loan officers do have to work pretty smart. There are just so many hours that you have in the day between getting the loans and making your contacts. And also, I think in terms of referrals, there's nothing as nice as a referral. When someone calls in and says, you just did a loan for Jimmy Williams, and God, he told me what a great job you did for him. Well, the deal is done.
Yeah.
At that point.
It's yours to screw up.
Yeah, right, exactly. Do you still do a lot of realtor business yourself now?
Sure. And most of what I do right now is realtor business.
Mm-hmm. And do you find yourself still pounding the pavement, or mostly?
I haven't called on offices in 3 years, I guess.
Mm-hmm. That's a nice luxury to have at some point in time.
Yeah.
But I think the point of it is that it just doesn't come because you have a nice smile. You gotta work and you gotta earn.
I'd be doing more business if I still called on offices, but I just have chosen not to.
Well, yeah, I just
at least for the time being.
Yeah, well, you know what? I just
reserve the right.
I just did an interview not too long ago, one that with a fellow named Duffy Gilligan, who's kind of a national legend, and he wants to do 30. Ironically, what you do, he programs himself to do $30 million a year. That's all he wants to do. He makes a real nice living out of it, and he is down in North Carolina, makes probably around $300,000, is my guess. And he is just a very happy man. He spends time with his family. He has his life complete. He's, done the 60, 70 millions, and this is where he wants to be for his life. Mm-hmm. And I think that's actually to be complimented, that he's found a point in his life that makes him happy as a person.
Sure. I agree.
The loan officers that you have, do you find that you have trouble, because this interview is a little bit interesting in the sense that I think there's probably a lot of executives and branch and regional managers that are probably going to listen to this for some of your comments. And I wondered if maybe we would get off track just a little bit and talk about the qualities that you look for when you're hiring loan officers.
Well, I look for, somebody that's been successful. I look for somebody that's going to, generally do good loans. That they're not going to have a high aggravation factors. Just a lot of trash that's going to turn the office upside down, and create a lot of demands on everybody. And somebody that is pleasant, and has a decent reputation and is reliable, and does a reasonable volume, but the volume becomes really secondary if you get you want somebody that does let's say 8 million or so at least. But once you get to that threshold, it's those other qualities that I think are more important.
Yeah, they kind of kick in.
And you want to, match up well. You want to be able to offer as a company what they're looking for as a loan officer. Yeah,
you know who? In fact, you might know him. Interviewed him some time back. Mike Twigg is a regional. Do you know Mike?
No.
Okay, well, he's over in the Greenbelt area, and he works for I think it's First National, which is part of National City Mortgage, and is very successful as a regional manager. And he he says the same things that you do, almost to the letter. For example, when they hire a loan officer, they actually have the people in the office take him out for lunch, and obviously they're interviewing him. They take the prospect, and they have other branch managers interview him, and they're looking for not just the intelligence quotient, but they're looking for people that will fit into their corporate culture. And as kind of proof of what he's doing, he was giving me some statistics which have eluded me, except for the main point that the people that he has have all been there 5, 6, 8, 10 years, pretty much like your people.
Uh-huh.
And that's because of the things that you were, articulated earlier, that they did up front to make sure that they had a fit today.
Yeah, yeah. That is the payoff, is longevity.
Right. And in our business, longevity counts for something. I'd rather have 3 people that have 10 years experience than maybe 10 that have 1 or 2, and you're getting that constant churning.
That's for sure.
And, you're just constantly putting out fires rather than have people who are literally running a business for themselves, and they don't need a lot of management oversight. You just need to be there, and you have confidence in your people.
Right.
Do you find that it's hard to hire loan officers today in this environment, because you say you look for people to be successful, which of course begs the question, if they're successful, why would they come to you unless they're looking to maybe increase their earnings?
I would say that I don't know, because I don't recruit very diligently.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of my many weaknesses.
You're throwing a lot of sins out here today, Jim. You must have a lot of Catholic guilt or something.
Sometimes I tend to be fat and happy. But over the years, certainly you need to prospect a lot, and timing is very important. So you may, have a wonderful fit with a lot of people, but the timing is wrong. There's no reason for them to move. So to be successful at recruiting, you need to stay in touch with a lot of people who are good prospects, and then hope that when the timing presents itself, that you're there with the right kind of situation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very time-consuming exercise.
Yes, it is, and very frustrating, as you know, as a manager.
Myself about a C+ at it.
I'm not sure how good I was at it either. There's 2 schools of thought on it, as you know. One, that you hire anybody that walks off the street and hope they have some intelligence, and you train them and hope they never learn what another company is, and produce somebody that's going to hang around for a long time. The other way, you see the ads every week in the Washington Post where they're looking for experienced loan officers with less than 2 years, hoping that someone else trained them and they're unhappy for whatever reason, you're going to come snake them. But having been a regional manager for years, a long time ago, it's very frustrating putting ads in the paper and interviewing and trying to get that right fit, and sometimes just trying to get bodies. Very frustrating in this business, which is kind of strange, I think, because this is a business where loan officers, if they're good, where can young kids go that are 24, 26 years old and make $100,000? I don't know of too many places.
Yeah, it's hard to break in, though. I mean, if you took 20, 24-year-olds, I don't think any more than 1 or 2 of them would be around, when they're 30.
Yeah, I agree.
Those are pretty long odds, and, if you can go over to, Silicon, Virginia, or, I think there are an awful lot of opportunities now for young people in the technology area. And I would say that you're correct that the earnings potential is there and you can reach it pretty quickly, but I still don't think the allure of mortgage banking is very strong for your average college graduate.
Yeah. Why do you think that's so? It's something that's crossed my mind when I was in management. That the allure is it because you think that it is such a hard job breaking in, and you really do have to work hard? Do you think that turns people off?
The breaking in it certainly is a reality that you face. I think it's a relatively stagnant business. I mean, there is growth, but and there is change. There have been tremendous changes, as you know, in secondary marketing, automated underwriting, on and on. But I don't think it's viewed as a dynamic industry, and I don't think it has sex appeal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think you would have much success recruiting on the campus of Johns Hopkins University for loan officers.
None whatsoever. I went to Georgetown. I can assure you, none whatsoever.
And even if you were successful in recruiting them, I don't think it would end up being a worthwhile endeavor for the company.
Yeah.
So it takes sort of a special breed of cat. It's a combination of personalities that I haven't broken the code yet. I mean, I see car salesmen that have done terrifically well, and I've seen, as I said, for every, I've seen lawyers that have done very poorly, but I've seen some that have been very successful. So you get a huge range of education and IQ points, I think. There's a theory in the stock brokerage business that, and this was years ago. It's been upgraded a little bit now, but they loved people who sold door to door or sold insurance, anything that had to do with direct sales, getting out there on your own and making a success. They just love those kind of people. And so I think you could probably make a case to getting a college graduate out of school. You're right, they're not going to find it sexy, but perhaps finding that person who's in direct sales, maybe for pharmaceutical sales, somebody that's making, $35,000, busting his hump, doing okay, plainly unhappy. That's just the kind of person that you want to get to. Yes, I would agree with that.
What kind of changes have you seen in the industry, our industry, in the last 5 years, and in terms of getting sales? If you were addressing your comments to loan officers, for example,
in terms of how one acquires.
Yeah, exactly. I'll throw out something that as a catalyst, maybe, and that is something you alluded to, and that is the increase in realtor companies out there that have strategic alliances and the loan officers that have in-house loan officers.
Yeah, that has been a major change. I mean, I could address that as one specific topic. I mean, the transition that you've seen with in-house lenders, they've existed for 10 years or 8 years anyway, but the models were all unsuccessful. They did it wrong. They were brokers. They didn't have pricing. They didn't perform. They were resented within the offices.
Oh, absolutely.
And they finally evolved into a different model that is now generally much, much more successful. Long and Foster.
Mm-hmm. Well, you probably know Herb Engler.
Yeah.
Ronte's a good buddy of mine.
Yeah, does.
Town boy.
They do a great job.
Yeah, he does a hell of a job.
It's not easy, but they get it done, and they attract good loan officers, and those loan officers make good money, although they pay a heavy price in having to deal with an awful lot of people and personalities and issues that are not productive.
Mm-hmm. How do your loan officers get around that? I know that it is a problem in general in the industry with some companies where you go in and all of a sudden, that branch manager, the realtor branch manager, they're just under enormous pressure to push all the loans to the mortgage sub.
Yeah, I mean, there are offices where I no longer do business when I used to because of that. But you get down to the personal relationships that are preeminent. I mean, you don't have a relationship with an office. You have a relationship with realtors. And you may lose some business, but you still have the relationship with realtors and a track record and a comfort level, and they want to give you their loans. They want to refer business to you. And most of the time you're going to overcome the pressure that they're under to refer the in-house lender. They may refer the in-house lender also, but they refer you with, as a sort of a first among equals.
Mm-hmm. So you think
here are three names, but if I were choosing, I'd choose Jim Feely.
Yeah, right. Well, that's exactly how they get around that three-person rule. Here's A, B, and C. I sure like Jim, and so that's where the first call is going to go.
But the answer is the pie, I think, is getting larger. So there are more dollars being lent, and that certainly helps. And probably what you have seen, although I don't have the statistics to back it up, is a smaller percentage of loan officers are doing a larger percentage of the business.
Mm-hmm.
So the rich are getting richer, basically. And that's why it's harder still to break in the business.
Right, exactly. But I think also that there's always a flip side to that. The flip side is if you're in the business now and you've got your training and you have the base, you have an opportunity to get up to the next level.
That's true.
Maybe at the expense of somebody else. There is a shakeout in the industry going on. Tom LaMalfa, who owns Wholesale Access and is kind of the authority in matters of this sort, predicts that the amount of loan officers from the start of year 2000 to the end of year 2000 will drop from 90,000 to 67,500.
Was that right?
Yeah, which is quite.
It doesn't represent very much production, though.
Yeah,
they're bodies, but I don't know if there are many dollars associated with those bodies.
Yeah, well, exactly.
But I do think, I don't mean to sound too down on the business. I mean, if you're good and you're coming into this business now, you're going to have plenty of opportunity, because honestly, the most successful people who I know in the Washington area that are successful, they don't spend much time on the street like they used to. I mean, and new people, there are many fewer new people coming in the business, and you do have an opportunity to interact with agents and to win their business, and there's going to be less competition. Jim Feely, you could steal business from Jim Feely. It might take you a year to do it, but they haven't seen Jim Feely in Taylor Real Estate office in a year and a half. Now, he's a nice guy, and we still send him some business, or Realtor XYZ does. But hey, I see this nice, young, sharp, fresh face in here,
mm-hmm.
And eventually that's going to spell loans.
Right. I think I'd like to end this interview on that high point, because I think your point is well taken out there, that for all the problems that our industry is going through, we're in a kind of major contraction. I think a lot of people would say there's the loss of refis. You have all these affiliated mortgage companies. The fact of the matter is, there's still, the fundamentals are there. It's an opportunity business. It's an opportunity to earn an annuity income and to build a lifelong income stream. And, as long as you got a little bit of intelligence and you have some sales ability. Mm-hmm. Well, look, I want to thank you very much for talking to our people today. I thought it was very insightful, and certainly you mentioned towards the end that you didn't want to be too down. I don't look upon this as being down at all. I think you're very much of a pragmatist, and you kind of call it like it is. And I think sometimes people need to kind of hear it like it is too. Sometimes people get so enthusiastic and they're yipping and yapping or stuff. They just kind of roll and roll and roll, and when you kind of add it up at the end of the day, they really didn't say too much. But I think you had a lot to say here, and I want to thank you very much for it.
Sure. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Jim.